So I was doing some research last week and I stumbled into this. Then I saw this. And I'm like, wait a second. Is it possible that America's most famous doctor somehow killed George Washington? That's what we're talking about today. By the way, guys, if you enjoy these videos, do me a favor. Find that like button on your screen and very, very gently destroy the like button. Subscribe and share with friends. It means a lot to me. So we're going to start today with a quick background on Dr. Benjamin Rush, known by some as the father of American medicine and certainly the father of American psychiatry. Benjamin Rush was born in Philadelphia, the fourth of 7 children. In 1760, at the age of 14, he graduated from New Jersey College, which is now known as Princeton, becoming the youngest ever graduate of Princeton. And then he went off to Europe, where he attended medical school and came back to start teaching chemistry at the brand new, newly opened medical school over at the College of Philadelphia. This was the very first med school in the colony, so it was a kind of a big deal. Benjamin Rush wrote the first American chemistry textbook. He wrote dozens of textbooks and medical publications. He taught over 3,000 students. He was also a member of the Continental Congress, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and the very first Surgeon General of the Continental Army, the main doctor for the Continental Army, until George Washington came across some handwritten anonymous letters one day that were just bashing him, saying that maybe he should be replaced with someone else and his army was an unformed mob. And he's like, wait a second. He's like, I think this handwriting is Dr. Rush's. And of course it was. So Benjamin Rush was asked to resign as Surgeon General, and he later came to regret writing all those nasty things about Washington. Now we're going to fast forward to 1793. George Washington has just been elected to his second term as President of the United States, and Benjamin Rush is still the most famous doctor in America. He's living in Philadelphia when Philadelphia gets slammed by a plague, an epidemic called the yellow fever, right? And so people are just like dropping all over the place. Thousands and thousands of people just dropping dead. And people are looking to Benjamin Rush for guidance, right? He's like the most famous doctor in America. So at first, he's treating his patients with, a bland diet and cool fluids and rest. But 4 of his first 5 patients dropped dead. And so Benjamin Rush starts like freaking out and looking for other treatments. And he does some research and finds some writings from another doctor 50 years ago who says that he had treated yellow fever by draining his patient's blood. It was a practice called bloodletting. Dr. Rush is like, well, what do I have to lose? Let me give it a shot. Now, quick note on bloodletting. It had been around for like 2,000 years, and it was based on the idea originally that humans had 4 humors, right? The human body consisted of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. And that any disease was caused by an imbalance in these humors. And so the way to fix the disease, to cure the disease, was to rebalance the humors. And that was typically done by draining blood. So again, Benjamin Rush is like, look, I got nothing to lose. Let me give this a shot. And he starts draining his patient's blood. And what do you know? He thinks that it works. So, he becomes a huge fan of bloodletting, and not just like a little bloodletting, but like he would drain lots and lots of blood, and thought that it was just like the most amazing discovery, and believed that God had somehow picked him, chosen him as an instrument to, teach the Americas about bloodletting. So he later wrote, he said, "Never before did I experience such a sublime joy as I now felt in contemplating the success of my remedies. It repaid me for all the toils and studies of my life." So, think about it. You have America's most famous doctor saying this is the thing. And so Americans all over the country are like, hey, look, if I get sick, drain my blood, man. Drain my blood. Dr. Rush is saying it's okay. But his therapy wasn't as well received in the medical community, right? Amongst other doctors, other professionals. Most of them thought Dr. Rush was crazy. They called the practice murderous, and they said that his doses of draining blood were fit for a horse. He was forced to resign from the College of Physicians, which he had helped create, by the way, and he starts getting blasted in the media, especially from this one guy named William Cobbett, right? So William Cobbett says of Dr. Rush's work on bloodletting, he says that it's one of those great discoveries which have contributed to the depopulation of the earth. And he also says of Dr. Rush and his followers that I verily believe they have slain more Americans with it than ever Samson slew of the Philistines. Dr. Rush, by the way, sued Cobbett in court for libel and ended up winning that lawsuit and getting a $5,000 award, which at the time was the biggest ever awarded in Philadelphia courts. So here's where we get back to Washington. The very same day that Cobbett lost that lawsuit to Benjamin Rush in Philadelphia, George Washington was lying on his deathbed in Virginia. The day before that, Washington had been out on his horse all afternoon. It was like a brutal, just cold day. So there was like freezing cold rain, and Washington was riding around his plantation. He got in that night for dinner a little bit later than usual, and he sat down for dinner with his damp, sort of wet clothes. And later that night, he started to get a throat ache, right? And later started having shortness of breath. So at some point, very early in the morning, Washington calls for his doctors and his team, and he's like, hey, drain my blood, man, drain my blood. And so they do. They drain some blood from him at around 7 o'clock in the morning. They drain 12 to 14 ounces of blood. So just to give you a little perspective, that's about the size of a Coke can, right? By 9:30 in the morning, they drain another 18 ounces of blood. Then at 11 o'clock, another 18 ounces. And this is followed by a fourth bloodletting of 32 ounces. So in total, Washington is drained, right, of 80 ounces of blood. That's about 40% of all the blood he had. Now here's the problem. The problem is that today we know that if you lose more than 40% of your blood, you will die. Now, to be fair, it's not known exactly if Washington died of blood loss or if he died of his throat infection. But some people blamed Benjamin Rush for Washington's death. And here's what we can say about that. Even though Benjamin Rush was not in the room when George Washington died, his support of bloodletting may have contributed indirectly to the death of George Washington, America's first president. 14 years later, when Rush was lying on his own deathbed, sick with typhoid fever, he had himself drained twice. Obviously, it didn't work. And by the time he died, his professional reputation had suffered tremendously. But the fact is that, his 50-year career as a doctor was about way more than bloodletting. So we'll give Dr. Benjamin Rush a pass on the whole Washington thing, and we will remember him as a great patriot and one of the most important doctors in American history.